My name is Colleen Thomas. I'm the project manager for the Research Culture Initiative at UCD. If you received an email from this conference, I probably wrote it. Apologize if I was in any way cranky or smart, but lots of things going on for us, and we're so glad you're all here. So to start off our second session, we have Sean Sapcariu talking to us about supporting diverse roles and expertise for careers in research. He is from the Luxembourg National Research Fund, and he's a program manager there. He coordinates strategic funding programs as well as research culture initiatives. He was responsible for the development of the narrative CV template used in all FNR programs, and is active in other national and international activities and working groups in responsible research assessment, which we just heard some about in the previous presentation, and research culture. In addition, he has coordinated the creation and implementation of the National Center of Excellence in Research program in Luxembourg. And before coming to FNR, Sean did a PhD in biomedicine and worked as a liaison officer at the University of Luxembourg Rectorate. Sean, I welcome you to the podium.
Thanks. Cool. Thank you for that introduction. It sounds much more impressive than it actually was, but all right, so I'm going to stand in the front to give the cameraman a little bit more, or camera people a little bit more to do. I want to talk a little bit about careers, but also research assessment and research culture and all these kind of topics that have come up already in the morning and what we'll be talking about in the afternoon as well. And I've stolen or I've used the same slides or some of the same slides as James because they're good ideas and they bear repetition. But I'll start with slides from Naomi Bonn. She's a researcher. Was at the University of Hasselt, I think, or is there, but currently working at the UKRI on some other things. And she is one of the pioneer kind of researchers on research culture, and the stuff that she's done in her PhD thesis and in her postdoc work is actually quite impressive, and is leading the way on kind of evidence base for things around research culture. And one of her main ideas from the many discussions and talks and interviews that she gave was that the success for careers, for individual careers, right? All these things that, production, quantity, competitiveness, sensationalness, individual achievements, they're different from what we value as success for research, right? Which should be more based on theoretically quality, reproducibility, open science, innovation, all these kind of values. And there's a mismatch. And that fundamental mismatch is an issue, right? That creates this pipeline of where you have a whole lot of people at the lower levels, including a lot of diversity, and because of this focus on narrow metrics and outputs and things like this in production, that the pipeline kind of filters out many people and filters out diversity. So you end up at the top with a limited amount of diversity and a limited amount of people, and because there's no diversity there, the diversity doesn't represent and doesn't flow down, and ideas maybe diversity equals different ideas and creativity and innovation, all these sort of nice values. So this is something that we might want to shift. It's kind of like, and I'm American, so I call it soccer, but you have a football team, right? Is it football here? I think it's football in Ireland. Okay, and you have a whole football team, but you only really want strikers. And then the team doesn't work. This is her analogy, not mine. So if it falls flat, I apologize. As has brought up in an earlier session, the Wellcome Trust had this really nice survey in 2020 where they saw a kind of negative concept of research culture, right? With negative words mostly used to describe research culture. The idea, you can't see this in the slides, but the recognition and credit is kind of either taken from you or Gesundheit, or no, it's totally fine, or not really appropriate for what you've done, or maybe people are taking credit for other people's work. The amount of professional help needed, because of mental issues and pressure is drastically high, way too high, and the amount of harassment is absolutely incorrect. Like you can't have, this is about 50 to 60% of people that have either witnessed or experienced bullying and harassment. This is absolutely not how we should be in our research culture. Okay, so we need to change, but who should do it? Whose responsibility is it? Nobody really wants to take on that responsibility because it's a massive, massive beast with a lot of different areas. And if you move first, you have a disadvantage because this is the way that the system works, and you're now being different from everyone else. People don't really talk to each other. Well, in the past, right? Now we're having these great conferences. There's groups of communities of practice, which is fantastic. And there was a lack of coordination, and there needs to be more. But this was a couple years ago. So what do we do, right? How do we broaden what we value? How do we support a more diverse set of roles and careers, and how do we work together to create and sustain this change? And what I want to talk about in the next slides is a little bit starting from the top level, going towards, well, the top level at the bottom, the big systemic change, to kind of broadening what we value, and then kind of circling back out. We'll see if this works. You can let me know in the lunch. So I'll start with two kind of testimonials, talks, or quotes from Adeline Leiser and Mark Schultz. Adeline Leiser is the CEO of the UKRI. She was also involved in the Royal Society's Research Culture Initiative back in 2018-16. And at a meeting, online meeting around the narrative CV, the resume for research and innovation, she said, if you ask your nephew what they want to do when they grow up, they want to experiment, explore, and discover, not that they want an H index of 60. Okay, I think this is resonating. My boss, Mark Schultz, said when we talk to researchers and ask about their achievements, it's not that they published 2 articles in Nature or whatever your journal article of choice or journal of choice is, but they did some nice science. They contributed to the community, helped patients, these sorts of things. And this is kind of the culture, right, that we want to promote. It's not the H-index journal impact factor culture, but more this is what we contributed to society and people. And so that gets back to, of course, research culture. James did a much better job of presenting this picture than I did. I am. But the idea is, in my mind, I like the definition of the Royal Society. Kind of, it's a blanket definition. Research culture, determines how research is evaluated, conducted, and communicated. So it's kind of everything. And I love the values framework. Culture is underpinned by values. There is no other way to say it. And these values, I think, are representative of what we should be doing and what we should be thinking about in research culture. And if you noticed in the Queen's talk, some of the things that came up in terms of when you were talking were the same sort of values, right? Transparency, collegiality. They're there, right? And Science Europe has put them on paper so that we can all focus on them. And I think this is great, and everything we do, evaluation criteria, hiring, promotion, all that sort of stuff should derive from these values. Okay, different picture from James, but this is from the Wellcome Trust, who's responsible. They found from asking the community, it should be the institutions and the funding bodies. So I'll take responsibility as the funding body. I can't take responsibility as an institution. We have something to do here. So let's do something. And I stole an idea from Karen. I asked her if I could use it. She hasn't said yes yet. I hope she's okay with it for YouTube. Sorry. She is a wonderful kind of mover and shaker in the research culture space. And she has this concept that to shift research culture, we started with open science and Plan S and all these sorts of things and open access. And in the midst of doing this, we realized, okay, in order to really implement open science, we need to kind of change how we assess, right? To add assessment criteria around open science and open access and these sorts of things. And not only around that, but many other things. And that's where we are now, shifting research assessment and then recognition and rewards. And then Karen's thesis is that in order to do this, we really actually need to focus on careers, career structures, career precarity, and shifting in that. And we're not there yet, but that's maybe the place that we should be looking in the future and thinking ahead and trying to target that while working on the other steps. James has already talked about this. It's a great initiative at a European level to kind of really push institutions, funders, funders, universities, research institutions towards kind of aligning and moving together towards a responsible research assessment. And I'll leave it to you to go and check out the document. It's pretty cool. The signing starts next week, so I'm sure that all the institutions here are going to sign, right? Okay, but what are we doing at FNR? The Luxembourg National, so FNR is the Luxembourg National Research Fund. We've been trying to push hard in this space. This is a picture from Dora. They say that research culture is kind of the intersection of research assessment, the red, open science and scholarship in the green, and then equity, inclusion, EDI in the blue. And these are kind of the areas that we should try to work on. We do a fair amount, and I'll go through some of them quickly. And if you have more questions, let me know, or check our website, because we try to be visible about this. So one thing we do is developing responsible research assessment resources for everybody, right? Because this is not something that we should do alone in Luxembourg or even in Europe, really. So we co-produced a video with Dora, and the idea is it's these practical tips around how research evaluation should be to make it more responsible, to think about conflicts of interest, aligning with the goals of a program or a funding scheme, looking broad instead of narrow for outputs, and these sorts of things. We show this in front of every single one of our panels. We send it to all of our evaluators. It's on YouTube. You can use it for whatever you want, share it with whoever you want. And we don't even brand it as FNR because it's not us, it's Dora. It's these Dora principles that we really think are important and valuable. We have an awards, so kind of just recognizing researchers and people in research and the achievements that they have. And we don't kind of limit it to the quote-unquote traditional achievements. We recognize scientific achievement. So this used to be outstanding scientific publication, but we shifted it because an achievement in science is bigger than just a publication, right? It's a bigger, broader thing. Promotion of science to the public, so scientific outreach, how researchers and research teams are, really dealing and communicating with the grand public or the broader public. Outstanding PhD thesis, so looking at that level as well, and not just kind of looking at the high levels and recognizing them. And then a new one from last year, outstanding mentor, so outstanding mentorship. And this is the idea of mentorship is important, it's vital. In research and teams and interpersonal relationships within research, and we need to recognize this and just tell them, hey, what you've done is a good job, please keep doing that, and make them visible to others as kind of like good, an example of something good that they should emulate. Okay, and then we've changed our policies in line with Dora. We've signed Dora a couple of years ago. No metrics are allowed in our applications. If we see them, we will remove them before they go out into evaluation. If the evaluators talk about them, we tell our panel members not to take them into account, and we write at the end of every document, like conclusion that we send back to our applicants. There was no, if there's metrics mentioned, they were not taken into account. They are not discussed. We foster open access. Everything that comes out of FNR money has to be published open access. There's no exceptions. The narrative CV, which I'll talk about next, to kind of move towards a broader range of a broader range of research outputs and what we value and recognize. Data management plans are required for all projects as well to kind of foster this idea towards fair, the findable, accessible, interoperable, and reproducible data. And then, of course, training and guidance, because it's not good to kind of implement all these policies and, as one previous speaker said, make all the changes for the institutions without giving guidance around it. And, of course, not to try to make these changes too often. And getting feedback on them, which I'll discuss as well moving forward. So let's talk a little bit about the narrative CV. We implemented it in 2021 across all of our funding schemes. And why? Because we wanted to balance the quantitative side with the qualitative side, right? improper use of metrics is not good, but some metrics have their uses, or quantitative data has its use, and we wanted to balance this. So we use all this in the ORCID, so we mandate all researchers to have a ORC ID. Because it also facilitates us in terms of gathering information, so in downstream reporting, we don't have to make them kind of type massive lists. We can just get those from ORCID, which makes everybody's lives easier. And then in the narrative CV, we ask for scientific vision and career path. We try to get the potential of the researcher based upon their academic age, and a broader set of contributions to science and society. And what it looks like is, it's based heavily on the Royal Society's resume for researchers, or what's now called the resume for research and innovation, where you have these 4 different areas of contributions. So generation of knowledge, development of individuals and teams, the research and innovation community, and then broader society. And then with those chunks where the applicant can write something, we add a space for a personal statement, so a vision. What is the vision for themselves, their research group, what have you? As well as space for people to outline their career progression. So maybe they had some carrying responsibilities, which led to a gap in their CV, or did a sabbatical and went to an internship on science communication, which I've read in a narrative CV. You know, all these things that maybe a non-quote-unquote traditional, Hillary Noon from the UK calls it a squiggly career path. And there's space, COVID-19, right? Maybe COVID had some issues that they want to bring up in their CV. And so there's space for that here. And then it's, of course, evaluated, right? Because that's important as well. It's not just how it's done, but how the evaluators look at it afterwards. And the key point is the orange box. It's context for the proposal. We're moving away from the idea that, okay, a researcher has this much H-index and these many publications in high-impact journals, and it's more that the proposal is what's interesting, right? What do they want to do? And then, okay, we can look at the CV and say, okay, this is a proposal for a PhD candidate, so are they, have they mentorship and leadership experience, etc. Of course, we give guidance to the reviewer and the panels. I've showed you this, told you about the video, and there's other guidance as well. And the idea that it supports a broader and more nuanced evaluation through kind of a slower decision making by we try to reduce the bias that can come from these shortcuts from too much quantitative information. And in the spirit of sharing our results and doing this together, we've done a feedback survey where we've contacted in 2021, and we're currently on the 2022 edition of the survey. We've gathered feedback from applicants, evaluators, and panel members, although the panel member numbers are low and you can count them. And then we wrote a report and put it all online for free. It's not peer reviewed, but all the raw data is there. The report is there for anybody to use and analyze as they'd like. And I want to show you some of the pictures. So basically, how satisfied are the applicants in 2021? About half are positive about it. 33% are, this is fine, and 20% are negative. In this year, that's shifted. I think the satisfaction from the negative satisfaction is now under 10. I think it's like 8%. So we're moving in the right direction. Guidance in 2021 wasn't so great. So the applicant side, it's hard to see, 22% negative, 19% neutral. Reviewers, 50% positive, but the other 50 were neutral or negative. So we need to do a better job there. But this year, for the applicants, sorry, I'm not an expert at PowerPoint, so it's just copy-paste from the SurveyMonkey. Guidance for the applicants, you can see negative is, what, 9%? So we're getting better. And for the for the reviewers, negative guidance is what, 7%. So we've we've improved on the guidance. And the numbers are about the same in terms of how many people we've asked. What's important to note in Luxembourg for this and the upcoming slides, none of our evaluators are from Luxembourg. So all of the researchers that we ask to evaluate as peer reviewers come from outside of the country because we want to reduce or drastically minimize conflict of interest. The most striking result from the 2021 survey is the one in the middle. How useful was the CV in your evaluation from the reviewers? 71% said, this is good. which is cool. So all these people around the world are saying, okay, narrative CVs, we're okay with this. This is nice. And only 9% were negative. And if you look at the applicants, it was a little bit more negative, 21% or 22% negative, but it's also increased this year as well. The report will come out next year. You can take a look if you'd like. From this year, and this is crazy, this is a new question, the most surprising result, we asked about how much support people have gotten when filling out a narrative CV, and it's all over the board. And this, I think, is a bigger issue. It's the amount of support that we're giving the different levels of staff who are applying for grants. And this is an issue for us in terms of guidance, but also for institutions. And that's a bigger, maybe, key of how successful an applicant will be, how much support and guidance we're able to give them. But we got to dig in a little bit deeper. Oh, I'm not going fast enough. Okay, we have some critical free text feedback as well. So we wanted to, take on what people have said as well. That is more critical, right? So not enough space, but we're not about quantity, it's about quality. ORCID can still show publications so reviewers can look at them. This is fine. We're not trying to completely say publications are bad, we're just trying to shift the mentality. Narrative form will benefit those with good writing skills. Okay, fine, same thing for a proposal. And as we've just shown, it's actually the support more than the writing skills. And then it takes more time. And initially we said, yeah, this is fine, because we want to reduce bias. But then we have data from this year, which shows actually, no, it's a bell curve. About 50% say it takes about the same amount of time, with a little bit of a shift towards more time. And then in terms, I'm going faster, I'm sorry. In terms of difficulty to assess from the evaluators, it's again a bell curve, right? So it's not more difficult or categorically more time to assess or make. It's about the same. So we're not making a drastically new, more difficult thing. Okay, so the last bit of couple slides, I'm almost done. Back to our questions, what do we do? How do we broaden what we value and reward, and how do we support a more diverse set of roles and careers? Here's a couple crazy ideas. For hiring, promotion, and assessment, look broader, right? Broader assessment criteria, like the narrative CV stuff I just showed you. Rethinking recognition and rewards, making it broad. Diversity. Increase the diversity of hiring and assessment panels, because if the diversity is already there, they will inherently create a more diverse pool of applicants or grantees, and then shifting focus in the assessment as well towards this kind of broader range. And then the really crazy stuff, career precarity, maybe some team science-based career structures, right? Because we know that it's not necessarily just the PIs doing all the work and everyone else is just kind of there in the background. It's more of a, in some domains, I know. And then rethinking traditional paths, right? Mobility is really important for research. But as COVID has shown in the last couple of years, there's a lot of options around virtual and distance working and learning. Maybe we can think about something like virtual mobility. I don't know, just an idea. Okay, how do we work together to create systemic change? Last slide. We are, and we have to continue doing so. There's a lot of communities of practice that exist through the Science Europe Working Group, Joint Funders Group from the UKRI, DORA has a funders discussion group, RORI, the Research on Research Institute, this European reform discussions like this one. This is what we need to keep doing, and more often and together. That's it.
That's great, thank you very much. Really interesting to hear about all the initiatives and the resources available. Please, questions?
It's really impressive presentation. My question is, as a funder, what criteria do you consider while finding and selecting reviewers for the particular call?
This is a very good question, and I think this is a place where we as funders need to change. Currently, it's kind of dependent. There's no kind of strict guidelines on how a reviewer is selected. We want someone obviously of good quality who is aligned with the area of the domain of the proposal and the kind of specificities that are required. Like if it's a PhD training grant, then we want somebody who has experience with training and stuff like this. But I would argue that we need to kind of think about, okay, mandated female gender balance, right? So we just installed at the FNR this year that there can't be single gender panels. There has to be a minimum of one, hopefully more, of an underrepresented gender on a panel. And I think we should go farther in terms of also career stages and locality and all that sort of stuff.
Thank you.
Question at the back.
Thank you. That was so interesting. I just have a question. For those who thought the narrative CVs were not a good idea, did you explore the reasons as to why? And also, was there any link between those respondents in a negative way and the ones that the more metric-based CV would suit better?
That's a loaded question. Yes. No, but that, I mean, I'll be open and honest. I mean, we didn't get demographics in the first survey. We are getting them in the second survey. So that I'll be able to better address that question later. But I mean, it was very clear that the people that had these issues requested a traditional CV because it allows them to, you know, to maintain and to valorize all the work that has been done, that they've done, which is, there's nothing wrong with that, all right? Which is why we have ORCID and things like this. It's just that we need to shift the idea that, you know, a massive amount of experience and expertise is the only way that you can have success in the future, right? We need to open it up a little bit and make it a bit broader and, open to diversity.
A question that I still have about narrative CVs, while being very supportive of the concept: do they favour certain groups? Do they favour native English speakers? Do they favour those who are temperamentally a bit more inclined to up their achievements in narrative form than others who might be more favoured by a kind of a straight laying out of what they've done? So are there unintended consequences?
Maybe. We don't have the data on this yet. We're actually hopefully going to do a study on this with Rory or something around this, because I agree, these are sort of things that we need to understand. But I think what we need to do in general is shift the importance of the CV away, right? Shift the importance away from the CV, right? So what you're saying is correct, but if we put too much importance anyways on the CV, then this is the stuff that becomes more important in the assessment. And what we need to do is pick what assessment criteria are important to us, maybe based upon these values of what we want in the research that we want to fund, and then, you know, define assessment criteria for a proposal around that. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah, okay.
Our time is up. Okay. Sean will be at lunch, so please come and ask any further questions at that stage. So, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So our next speaker is going to be Brian Cahill on research culture and mental health. So Brian works at the Leibniz Information Center for Science and Technology as grant manager of the REMO cost action on research and mental health. Additionally, Brian is a member of the governing board of Euroscience and was previously chair of the Marie Curie Alumni Association. He was a Marie Curie Fellow himself with research interests focused on measurement techniques for droplet-based microfluidics, and currently acts as an evaluator on Marie Curie individual fellowships and other funding calls. So, Brian.
Thanks very much for the introduction, Adrian. So I work at the TIB. This is the German National Technical Library, and it's also the University of the Library of the University of Hanover, but it also has a research institute attached. We're working on the REMO cost action and research in mental health, and this is just to show kind of all the countries that we've got involved. It's most of Europe apart from Luxembourg, Estonia, and I think Georgia is a cost country that we don't. Those are the countries we don't have involved. So it shows kind of the breadth of the network, and we have kind of maybe 250 researchers actively involved and maybe affecting close to 1,000 other people who attend webinars and so on. Just to go into the background behind how I got involved in this, I was the chair of the Marie Curie Alumni Association from 2016 to 2018. And during that time, along with kind of many of the other people who are working in representative roles, for example, from Eurodoc or the Young Academy of Europe, and other associations, that we noticed that there was something going on, kind of that you're asked to deal with specific problems of individual problems that are very, very difficult to deal with as an individual, as a volunteer. And so we started working with a lot of the people who were expert in this field. For example, in the Marie Curie Alumni Association, we set up a peer mentoring program, Referent, which was co-managed, or is co-managed by Dara McCashin, who's working in DCU. So I think we started focusing on this, and in 2018, we made this one of the main parts of our annual conference that year at the Catholic University of Leuven. We also started working to raise awareness, primarily through having a session at the Euroscience Open Forum. That year was in Toulouse, and I think that was the year that I got elected to the board of Euroscience. And that through doing this, that we brought together a team of people who were working in representative roles, who were working, running doctoral programs. We also had a counselor from the Trinity College counseling service, and researchers working on the field of researcher mental health. I think this session was very well attended, mainly early career researchers that we got. What we had kind of response to our work was we had 2 articles, one in Science and one in Nature, and they interviewed some of our speakers. I think after raising awareness, we started asking what will we do next. So we started looking around to see who was working on this topic. I think in Eurodoc, Garrett O'Neill was president of Eurodoc. He was also Irish at the same time. And so we started working with Eurodoc. We also saw that at the Max Planck PhD net, that they were doing a lot of work to gather evidence, but also that there was a big scandal that emerged in this time where a director of a Max Planck Institute had to resign, and that at the time the leader of the Max Planck PhD net was Jana Lasser, and she's now involved in our network. And kind of within a week of this scandal breaking, that they reacted by publishing a position paper on power abuse and conflict resolution in research organizations. So this was, I think I was very impressed by this, that they kind of reacted so quickly. And so we started working together with Jana. We also looked to the researchers who were working in this field, and at that time that the paper by Cahill in research policy got a lot of attention. I think if we kind of look at the data on mental health and problems in PhD students in Flanders, that you can see kind of the data for the PhD students in comparison with a control group, that in all of the issues, all the 12 issues that are listed here, that PhD students are much higher, sometimes 3 times higher than the control group, and normally twice as high. So that we were kind of like asking, why is this happening? One of the things that the Max Planck PhD net did was to do a very, very broadly based survey. I think there are 5,000 PhD students within the Max Planck Society, and around half of them responded to the survey. So you can see that, you probably can't read it, but I think that what is seen is that for anxiety here, that kind of Germans have less anxiety than EU citizens than non-EU citizens, that women have more anxiety than men, and that as the PhD progresses, that from first year to second year to third year, that there is more anxiety as it goes along. So it has something to do with the work conditions, and it has something to do with kind of their experience of research culture. I think another interesting thing to see was kind of about conflict with supervisors. And I think on the left, it's anxiety, on the right, it's depression, but you can see that as satisfaction with the supervisor decreases, that there is more anxiety and more depression. But I think on the other side, that it's around 75% of the PhD students are satisfied, rather satisfied, or very satisfied with their supervisors. So it's a problem, but it's not the majority of cases, but it is quite a significant problem, is kind of how to deal with supervision and conflict in supervisory relationships. I know Sean was talking about research precarity, that research is not a clear career. I think this is a graphic that was done over 10 years ago by the Royal Society, and it shows kind of how few people will go on to be permanent research staff or professor within from the people who start as early career researchers. I think this hasn't changed. It hasn't got any better since then. But many of the focuses simply on publications is not something that has a huge value for somebody who leaves academia. But many of the experiences and training that you have within academia can be very useful for those careers. So I'd be quite interested to see if the narrative CV actually helps researchers prepare CVs better for moving into industry, because the one-size-fits-all academic CV is not a huge help for people to move out of academia. That I also show the research assessment in transition to open science. That has been shown by the previous two speakers. I think it shows kind of the emphasis on research publication and research funding above everything else within academia, that kind of really kind of devalues many of the other contributions that academics make, and kind of how to stop this kind of blinkered focus on these two topics, which are both very important, but how to move on and kind of have a more broadly based academic system. This is a graph, and I think I will move on to the next one. These are graphs, you probably can't read them, but they're from the OECD, and it's on research precarity. So the OECD did a survey on for all of the countries in the OECD, but they addressed the survey to corresponding authors, because a corresponding author has an email in all papers, and you can get in touch with them quite easily. And through doing this, they showed that the blue shows kind of people on fixed-term contracts, and gray and orange are either kind of on permanent contracts or other contracts. And I think that what can be seen is that in many of the corresponding authors under 45 are still on fixed-term contracts. So these are people who are supervising researchers. They are mid-career researchers. So I think in many countries that the first permanent position will be full professor and tenure. So and it's not particularly a question of money, because I think the top three countries for research precarity are Germany, Switzerland, and Austria. And these are countries that tend to spend more money on research. As it is, I think that what we're seeing is also a tremendous mid-career malcontentment. So if we look here, we see that Nature survey from 2021, and they're talking about the Great Resignation in terms of COVID, and that there is I think that the greatest level of dissatisfaction is in mid-career researchers. And this is showing is another paper from Elsa Loisel from eLife on mental health in academia, and shedding light on those who provide support. And it's the early career group leaders who consider providing support affecting their careers negatively. And it's quite clear that these are the ones that are overloaded in academia, that they have to probably prepare lectures for the first time, deliver a lot of lectures, kind of mentor early career researchers, apply for funding, and probably also have young kids at home. So I think this is probably the group within the system that is most stressed as it is at the moment. So what have we done? That we have launched our Researcher Mental Health and Wellbeing Manifesto last year. It's been viewed almost 5,000 times. There's a QR code and a link available. We spent about a year consulting our membership within our 3 working groups on what we should include. That we have we kind of divided our work into 3 different sections. I think that the first is targeted at the research ecosystem, more or less at the policy level, so that what we're doing is to create an inclusive platform that fosters dialogue between stakeholders, that we will challenge, monitor, and inform national situations. At the moment, we are preparing a series of policy documents that will cover as many of our countries as possible. We have an open access evidence hub that's on Zotero, that it can be accessed by anyone. The link can be got from our website. And we're also looking at revising the academic reward system and taking part in the consultation that led to the recent document. To develop strategies for how EU and national project-based research funding can be spent more sustainably and produce better outcomes for everyone. That's okay. And the second focus is on kind of a call for institutional change, and so that institutions take ownership of their impact on employee well-being, that we create and share a battery of evidence-based institutional practices that support researcher well-being, and address the impact of working conditions on mental health, to develop fair and personalized research assessment, and to extend the professionalization of doctoral and academic staff training. I think in many countries over the last 10 years this has come on a lot, but if we talk to colleagues in Eastern Europe or in many parts of Southern Europe, there's still a long, long way to go within the whole of the countries that we've got involved in our cost action. That we also call for researcher empowerment, because many of us have already started working on this, and we have a lot of work on bottom-up initiatives. So to raise awareness at the individual level, to promote bottom-up initiatives such as peer mentoring, and to have a person-centered and evidence-based approach to training career management. Then it's also the professionalization of supervision, or at least training and supervision, so that supervisors can learn kind of how to supervise in a way that is more suited for research productivity. So I think a lot of this is kind of, and this is also important that there's a recognition of academic service for supervisors and mentors, I think has been mentioned previously today. We published this in the Wellbeing and Mental Health of Doctoral Candidates, which was published recently, and that is available on Wiley. So what else have we been doing? We run an ambassador program, which is a training program for people from throughout our network on how to organize peer initiatives, how to engage with institutions, and how to influence policymakers within their countries. This was held last June in Grenoble, and we will run it for the next 2 years at least. We also ran our first conference about a month ago in Budapest, and that we had about 70 to 75 people involved in this conference, which is our first big network event, and that we will run this for the duration of the cost action, and intend to keep on running it sustainably afterwards. So what are our next steps? That we have a survey special interest group that has about 40 or 50 people working on designing and carrying out a survey, which will be the largest ever survey of the well-being of researchers in Europe. We have devised a template for policy briefs, and we're in the process of drafting those briefs throughout Europe. We will set up communities of practice to assess the effectiveness of mental health interventions, and we have quite a lot of practitioners involved in the network. So people who are working as counselors, people who are working as trainers and coaches throughout Europe. And we have submitted a Horizon Europe proposal a couple of weeks ago. So you can join us. Here's our address, but we also have kind of Twitter and social media. I think that's the translation from Google Slides to PowerPoint ate up, kind of rearranged this, but we have quite a lot of, we have a podcast on Anchor, and that we will have new episodes coming out soon. We also have grants that are available to facilitate research mobility, but also virtual mobility. And we have a virtual mobility team that does, one of our members does podcasts, others do small research collaborations, but I think there's quite a lot of activity within the action. So with that, I hand back to Adrian and look forward to your questions.
That works. Okay, thank you very much, Brian. That was really interesting, discussion about research and mental health, and particularly, the statistics about the depression as you go along through a doctoral program. That's quite telling, I think. Do we have any questions? We have one here in the front.
Thanks very much, Brian. Really interesting, as Colleen said. It's just a comment, really, rather than a question. I was very interested in the stats on the mid-career burden and mentorship. And actually, that's something that came out very strongly in our survey and our focus groups as well, that it's the mid-career folks who are shouldering a lot of the very important work which people appreciate on mentorship. And I wonder, maybe we should look at how we could share that burden more equally. I think there might be a gender balance there, imbalance rather, there as well.
I think that within our network we have a very big gender imbalance. We had 100 applications for the training school in Grenoble, and of those 90 were from women. I think that it's not just kind of, it's mainly in psychology or social science. I think this was kind of across the board. And I think it's what we see in every event that we run. And this is quite clear.
Hi, Jana Carton, UCD. Thanks, Brian, very much. Just a quick question. When you're looking at the data around mental health of doctoral students, have you considered the demographic that they belong to, and the fact that a lot of the issues for them are slightly more complicated than undergraduate students, and therefore often reflect more serious issues for them?
So
as
you
opposed to it being down to just the doctoral student, the doctoral award.
So you mean that it's the current generation of doctoral students, or?
Basically, a doctoral student will have more family responsibilities, perhaps, will have finance issues, will have homes or children or parental responsibility, etc. And it's over a longer duration than, let's say, the undergraduate students. So the nature of their mental health issues may be reflected a little bit more on that.
I think in the Levesque study, the control group was a comparable group of young people working in other sectors. So and with more or less a similar level of education.
Okay, that's great. Thanks a million. Very interesting. Thank you.
Thanks for that. It's a very important talk that you gave there, I think, this morning. I'm just wondering, in relation to one of your slides, you mentioned interventions and evaluating their effectiveness. Could you maybe talk to us about what some of those interventions are?
I think that an intervention is any action that is taken to improve the well-being of researchers. I think this can be kind of targeted at individuals. It can be a kind of peer mentoring program. It can be the university counseling service. It can be kind of support for career development. It can be training for supervisors on how to lead a research group. So I think these are all, it can be changes to the research assessment system. So you can have interventions at kind of from the research funder and policymaker down to the kind of individually focused interventions.
Thank you very much. I think that was a very sobering presentation and one that we all need to take on board. I do wonder if there isn't an additional cohort that might cast an even starker light, which is those who don't complete and are not showing up anywhere in statistics. And they're the people who, for a wide variety of reasons, will be feeling the same strains, maybe at an even higher degree. And I think some of the percentage points would then even stretch further over, because these are people who have made fairly major life-changing decisions to withdraw from programs where an academic institution and often a funding agency have already deemed them to be capable to be there, but they're unable to complete. So I think we need to perhaps look at some mechanisms to re-engage with people who have not remained within the streams and see what lessons we can learn from their experiences.
I fully agree. I think this was one of my main kind of reasons for starting this work, was because the Murray Skłodowski-Curie Actions doctoral networks provide funding for 3 years, and also require international mobility. And in most countries, it takes significantly longer than 3 years to finish a PhD. So I think this was a very, very common issue that people would approach me looking for advice on how to continue their PhD.
We have time for another question, if anybody has one last. Okay, then. Do you have any questions, Adrian? Do you want me to sum up then?
Well, just think.
Yes. So before we sum up, I'd like to thank Brian and Sean both for excellent presentations today. Thank you very much.